Let's look at the Bible reading. There is a correction there. It's Numbers 21 to uh, 7. 20, not 2. Okay. Every story in the Bible has a voice, but some stories don't just speak, and they reveal. They reveal the heart of God, the identity of Christ, and the glory of grace. Today we are going to look at Moses. We know Moses means driven out of water. Moses is the prince who was raised by uh, the Egyptian king, who was a great leader, the first prophet, the one who saw God's finger writing 10 commandments, who performed so many miracles. Uh, Today, I want you to take a journey from a dry desert uh, to a rock that wept water, to a mountain where the glory shone like the sun, the tail of the rock. Think of desert, hot, dry, thirsty hearts, thirsty land. The people complain angrily. Why did you bring us here to die? Moses cries to God, Lord, what shall I do? God answers, not with judgment, but with mercy. Strike the rock, and water will flow. And Moses struck the rock. Water burst forth, life in the wilderness. And years later, in a different location, a different desert, but the same problem, no water. But this time, God gives a different instruction. Moses, don't strike, speak to the rock. Moses thinks, why speak? And in his anger, he did not speak, but he struck the rock twice. And yes, water still flowed because God is faithful even when we are not. Moses misrepresented God's heart. He pictured an angry God when God wanted to show mercy and grace. And Moses lost the entrance to the promised land. Not because God rejected him, but because Moses misrepresented him. At times, I used to think in our conversation, was God so harsh with Moses? For all that he did, it was not considered in his favor. Why did he punish Moses like this? All these years he led the Israelites faithfully. One mistake he made, and his entry to the promised land was not granted. God is merciful. Water flows even when in complaint. God is holy. His instructions matter. God is patient even when leaders fail. God is gracious. Moses was disciplined, not discarded. God is redemptive, and this leads us to a mountain, to the place where Moses would stand again, not next to water, but next to glory. Let's climb the Mount Tabor, the mountain of transfiguration. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John. While praying, his face begins to shine. His clothes glow like blazing light. He is no longer the struck rock, he is the shining rock of glory. And suddenly, Moses appears. Elijah appears, standing next to Jesus. Moses represents the law. Elijah represents the prophets. Jesus represents grace and fulfillment. Matthew 5 and 17 reads, I did not come to abolish the law or the prophets, but to fulfill them. We read in John 1:17, the law came through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. The law pointed, the prophets announced, but only Jesus fulfilled. And that day, the message from heaven was very clear. The law and the prophets step aside and they point to Jesus, the rock of salvation, the rock of glory. Moses once struck the rock in anger, but now he stands next to the rock in glory. He could not enter earthly promised land by the law, but he entered heavenly glory by grace. Moses failed, but Moses was not finished. As Paul writes, they drank from the spiritual rock, and the rock was Christ. The rock was not just a miracle, the rock was a message. It was Jesus. He could be struck, he would be wounded, so that living water could flow for thirsty souls. He was the rock at Horeb. We might have failed, but we are not finished. Grace is bigger than failure. Redemption is stronger than regret. In New Testament, we come across the two criminals hung beside Jesus on the cross. Both were guilty. Both were condemned by law. Both had broken the rules, and the law had every right to punish them. The law had already spoken, you are guilty. You are condemned. You are beyond saving. One of the thieves joined the crowd, mocking Jesus, rejecting grace, even at the very door of eternity. But the other thief, though broken, bleeding, and dying, saw something different. He saw not a condemned man, but a king. He saw not a bleeding teacher, but a savior. He saw not a cross of death, but a throne of mercy. With his last breath, not with good works, not with sound theology, not with religious achievement, but with simple faith. And he said, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. He had no time to fix his life, no way to undo his crimes, no chance to earn his salvation. The law had finished its work, and the law had condemned him. But faith stepped in just in time, and Jesus, the rock that was struck, now spoke grace. Today you will be with me and paradise. The law condemned him, but faith saved him. The law shut the door, but grace opened the heaven. The law said You're guilty, but the rock said, you're forgiven. When we look at these passages, we realize that Moses made a mistake of not following God's instruction. And at that time, we feel as if God is very, very harsh. But if we look into the New Testament, we find in Matthew chapter 17, 1 to 4, on the Mount of Transfiguration, Moses appears again with Elijah. The promised land that he could not enter, it was shown to him from Mount Nebo. That promised land today, on the Mount of Transfiguration, he enters in glory. When we read the Numbers 21 to 12, we might feel God was so harsh. He didn't allow Moses to enter the promised land. But when we read Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 to 4, we realize that God is so gracious. What a script writer God is. When everybody thought that, okay, it's over for Moses, God had a different plan. We realize that when Moses died, it was God who buried him. Elijah did not experience death, but on the Mount of Transfiguration, all three are there with Jesus. Jesus, the fulfillment of the law, Moses, the one who brought the law, and prophets who point towards the law. What a combination where we find all three there on that mountain. And what is the message there? God speaks and tells them, listen to my son. This is the story of the rock. Where are we today? Are we at Meribah, frustrated, angry, and dry? Or are we at the Mount of Transfiguration, where we find the law, the prophet, and the fulfillment of the law, Jesus? God doesn't want us to strike the rock again. The message is very clear. Rock was to be struck only once. Now we have to speak to the rock, believe his words, and have faith in the plan of salvation. What a gracious God we serve. The way things unfold before us is so great. What a great spiritual truth hidden. Every story that we read, every story that we study in the Bible that talks about the story of grace, the identity of a Christ that reveals the heart of God. We need not strike the rock again. We need to speak to that rock and believe in Him. Let us examine ourselves. Are we still using our actions, our work to please God, or are we ready to believe His promises, His words, and are we ready to listen to Him? May God bless us to understand that our performances, our work do not save us. The law can take us close to the promised land. Moses could take Israelites very close to promised land. Moses could not take them into the promised land. In order to enter the promised land, we need Joshua, Jesus. Only Jesus can take us into the promised land. It is by faith we can be saved. Our works, whatever it may be, cannot save us. We need the grace of God in order to be saved. Let God bless us with this knowledge that our works don't save. We require God's grace to be saved. Law cannot take us to the promised land. It might take us near to the promised land. We need grace in order to be saved. Thank you.